Hi there, folks. This is Beau. This is the Beau Show. I'm Beau Mansfield, and with me today is my guest, Larry Walker. Hi, Larry. Thanks for coming.
Oh, my pleasure.
And Larry, you've been long associated with the local arts movement. You've been a business-owning hairdresser in town here for over 40 years, if not longer.
Right.
And yet, for at least 35 of those years or more, maybe even 40 years or more, you've been long associated with local arts in many ways. And maybe if you tell us about that, and then like what hats have you worn? What are you doing these days? And what is most on your mind in regard to local arts, and anything that you'd like to say about that?
Okay, sure. Yes, I've been in business here on Campus Corner now since December of 69, so that makes it 30, 40, 45, 46 years. I discovered after a few years of working professionally that I was making more money than anyone in my family had made, but I wasn't quite content with my life. And what I discovered was that I needed to get back into the community. I had originally been involved with the arts through the theater at OU when I was originally a student there. So I started looking at the arts, and I discovered that there were any number of avenues. And one of them that I became active with was with the Norman Arts Council in the late 70s and early 80s. Active with that board for several years. And then I was also on the board of directors for the Norman Ballet Company for 15 years. And then came back to the Norman Arts Council, where I've now been on the board for 7, going on 8 years. In the process, I've also become the chair of the Norman Public Arts Board, which was created in 2007. And I've been the chair of that since its inception. So heavily involved with public art. Through the Arts Council, I'm connected and help support, and a fan of most of the arts organizations here in town. In addition, there were 17 years in there. I also was, as a volunteer, was responsible for the makeup and hairstyles for the OU Opera program.
That's a lot of volunteering. Not just over time, just one show.
Just one show. And during those 17 years, I did the makeup and hair for 37 productions.
Good heavens. Well, what are you doing now? Like when you go to a meeting at the Norman Arts Council, what do you do? Or, what's it like?
What's it like is that the Norman Arts Council is very fortunate. We have a funding source which very few, in fact, virtually no city in the United States has what Norman does, in that Norman has a hotel tax. And if you stay at a hotel or motel, you pay an additional 5% sales tax. Of that, 25% of that additional tax is earmarked for the arts. And the Norman Arts Council has a contract with the city to administer those funds. So through the Arts Council, we have many projects. One is, right off the top, we grant out about 57% of that money to other arts organizations within the community. The balance of that then is used for various programming within the city that is not being provided by other organizations. Classic example being Second Friday activities, which have become quite popular and well attended. So some of those city funds are used for the marketing of that and producing of that, as well as other different programmings through the collaboration with the Firehouse for the children's arts program that's being done in a few of the public schools now, since the public schools aren't providing it, and some collaborative projects with the library. We find that during our board meetings, a lot of time is taken up just looking at our programming. Where can we use these monies to our best advantage? We look at various programmings in regard to diversity. We look at it as the use of public funds, which has a few strings attached to it, in that you're dealing with public money and there are things that it can be used for. And other things we have to be a little cautious about using the public funds.
This is kind of what, well, this isn't only what you're talking about. It makes me think of something you just mentioned. Is like the child education and arts, those activities that because the public schools don't have that you're doing. But this is the next question I had is kind of right what you were just saying, which is I'm not thinking of Norman Arts Council per se. I think Norman, Oklahoma, in a general sense, like the music and the art that I see the vast majority of the time strikes me as being what could be fairly termed as family friendly. And therefore it makes me wonder, what can something that is like more I use the word adult ill-advisedly because some people think that means porn, but I mean, adults, past PG-13, shall we say. What art can possibly succeed when the general tenor seems to discourage that? At least that's been my perception. That does not mean that I am not willing to be enlightened that I could be looking at it wrong. But it was just, that's the next thing I was
think your question applies not just to Norman. It applies really culturally in the United States. Mm-hmm. What makes it a little more unique from the Arts Council point of view is when you are using public funds, the scrutiny is more prevalent as far as being family-friendly, family-oriented. However, the system, the cultural system in the United States at this point is so lacking in the basic elements of education from elementary school on. I often think of that. There's a couple of great quotes, and I can't even attribute them because I can't remember them. But it's like, great art doesn't match your sofa.
Where do you hang it in your house?
Right.
Yeah.
A great piece of art is going to stand alone no matter where you put it. But yet at the same time, when students are not being taught line design, balance, texture, contrast, the elements of visual arts, then they have to rely on society and what is being available and sold and is popular rather than what is necessarily good quality. That applies to music. It applies to dance. It applies to all of the arts. And if you're not learning those wonderful key elements, then your appreciation is limited. To that wonderful other quote that says, I don't know much about art, but I know what I like.
Right.
Well, it's because we know what we know is what we do like.
Right.
So how can
that would which comfortable. The issue of the artist's responsibility to be able to disturb the audience in such a way that it is not sociopathic. It's difficult to ride that balance as an artist. But what I was interested in, I mean, I'm interested in everything you're saying, but I'm interested in, and by the way, this is probably the most serious interview I'm ever going to do. I'm a goofball as a general rule, but today I'm not going to do that. I know that you have a unique perspective here, and you're able to share it with us, and I'm grateful. So I'm not going to goof around, but I'm going to try to be a halfway intelligent interlocutor. And it just is. I'm thinking about the fact that what I do, I don't think you could call what I do pornographic much of the time, even if I've got dirty lyrics once in a while, even if it's salacious. I'm not getting up on stage and dropping trowel. Right. I did that once in New York. I don't have to do it again. And I made sure to be sober for that one.
I won't ask how it went. So
not terribly. Guys made fun of me. One or two women complimented me. It wasn't too bad. but I mean, that was back when I used to drink a lot, and I had the idea while I was drinking, and then I made sure to be sober just that one time to do that. Okay. But anyway, sorry, we got off of what we were saying.
Yeah, what I would like to back up just a little bit and say, being involved in the world of fashion, there's a thing that we study which is so applicable to all of the art, because in many ways fashion in itself is an art, is that we find something will be avant-garde.
Right.
Because it's new, it's different, it's not conforming to everything. Do we follow that, or do we let it nurture? And the more it is their exposure to it, if it makes it into the next cycle, then it's slightly becoming a little more conformist, slightly.
Mm-hmm.
At which point it goes through that, and then if you stay with that fashion change through the whole cycle, it becomes old guard.
Yes.
And then it becomes eccentric. And if it makes it clear back to the starting point of being viewed as totally out there, it becomes avant-garde. If it has made that complete cycle, then it's considered classic.
Now I'm a little confused, Larry, to be honest. I'm not sure. I wonder if my listeners would agree that I would. Could you repeat that for me? Because I'm not.
Okay.
In fashion as well as in art, there is a cycle. It's like well, I had a theory once, which was the minute something is uncool, it's hip. So by that standard, Peter Cetera is the hippest musician of all time because he's never been cool. Something like that.
Okay,
right?
just in terms of putting it in fashion that's happening right now, there's a very strong trend with women and young people coloring their hair really bright pastel colors, from blues and purples and pinks.
Yes.
Interesting and fun. There is no question about it, and it's being done a lot. If we look a year out from now, if it's still being done, that means the masses are starting to do it.
Uh-huh.
If it doesn't get to that point, it's simply a fad. And It hasn't really changed the public's perception of that.
How does something go back to being avant-garde if it only stays a fad?
If it stays a fad, then if fad becomes popular, then all of a sudden it's no longer a fad. It has become mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
But then if it stayed, say, this purple hair and blue hair, hot pink hair, is still around 2 years from now, it's becoming passé.
Right.
And then the people who are doing it onto the next level are the eccentrics who just won't give it up.
I see.
But they will be viewed in a more negative manner.
Yeah.
But if it makes it all the way back to the same time that the hot pinks, all of a sudden it became electric hot pink, it becomes avant-garde again.
Sure. And so...
But then if it's made that complete circle, it's been around long enough, tested enough, accepted enough, that it's considered a classic.
Well, then I guess we could come to the next question that I had, unless you wanted to continue with something. Innovation, preserving tradition, and the street level or vernacular artist. Like you had said before we were recording a few days ago, something about how sometimes you want certain things locally to be more innovative, and sometimes you're glad that I'm not sure what I think you were saying. You could see the point in preserving certain traditions, and the Arts Council or any number of organizations' role in so doing, but that you would sometimes like yourself for there to be more thought towards stuff not just being preserving tradition. For example, like the Norman Philharmonic, by and large, is preserving a tradition. Once in a while, I imagine there's stuff that they're doing that is edging towards. And now, this is my opinion. Again, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth or anybody else's, but my opinion is they're not going to go far enough for my taste almost any time. But then I'm a wild man, right? But then I do see maybe there's a value in preserving some of the traditions. But my impression is that because there are a large number of people and there is a publicity machine behind most any large organization, it is, and with a name that has the name of the city in it, that is going to gobble up a significant portion of the funds just by design because of the way organizations work with each other. And I wonder what the street level or vernacular artists can possibly do to be relevant to the Arts Council or any number of such organizations, or the university for that matter. They're not the same, but the fact is that OU, I can talk with my experience of there, that the avant-garde in the music department there is not the avant-garde of what the mainstream public would accept as avant-garde. It is truly esoteric. And so it's interesting that they preserve that, but they don't want much apparently to do with street level vernacular innovation, because it would basically cause a political fight, and they would have to continue to justify their curricular philosophy in action if that were to take place, and they can't really do it. So at least that's been my theory.
And understood, other than we have to look at the fact that as an educational institution, the university has the obligation, in theory, you come as a student and you're there for 4 years. Very few people make it out in 4 years. But
yeah, this timely graduation thing is another conundrum.
But during that time frame,
canard is what the word I meant.
The academic at this point, and as we expect and understand that they're going to do, has a canon that they must teach. And that canon is very steeped in tradition. They have moments of allowing things and experimental things to come through, but yet I think a good example of that is like in the theater department. Through the years, they used to feel the obligation to do at least one classic, meaning either Shakespeare or a Greek play, each year.
Yes.
So that by the time you have graduated, you will have had the opportunity of being exposed to and being a part of a classics production. Mm-hmm. Well, then you start adding other things into that canon. A good example is in the opera program. Also is by the time you graduated, you should have worked in something that's in 4 principal languages that are used. Mm-hmm. Then you have need to have the opportunity to work with an orchestra, large and small. You need to be involved in a production that has an opera production that has a ballet as a component. Now then, that's not saying that you can't take a classics production and upgrade it as far as date, time, and style, but yet at the same time the university has the obligation to teach that production as part of the classic canon. Where does that leave the open door? It doesn't leave much room for an open door in a 4-year period. Mm-hmm. Whereas on the street, we don't have the canon to be confined by.
And yet the street never knows of the canon. It seems like there's this divide that happens culturally because,
right.
And so what I'm thinking the only way, and we've talked about YouTube before, YouTube, though maybe it isn't perfect, maybe there's a downside, it is an ass saver, if you will, mm-hmm. as far as preserving certain things while also promoting innovation, if you will.
Sure.
And of course, my version of innovation on YouTube is like reckless eating or something ridiculous. But no, I'm right. Really partially serious. But they matter because they have millions of viewers and hundreds of thousands of subscribers, or more than that. I don't know. It's colossal. And they've been doing it for 5 years. And the man at the helm of it, or at least one of them, no longer has a day job because he's doing the YouTube thing every day. And he can branch out from what his original product brand was. He can do things that are tangential to it, and that will add to his portfolio.
One of the disadvantages to the YouTube, it has grown so massive that things get lost.
Mm-hmm. You've still got to work your ass off to promote it.
To promote it, or even as a viewer / participant, it's often not easy to find the things that you want to find. In other words, there is so much being put out that you have to go through a lot to find what you might be wanting to hear or see.
That's why I'm trying to. I already have a little bit of Facebook activity, but I'm just starting to deal with Twitter. I really would like to not have to do much on Twitter myself unless I can see the results. But I mean, I'm going to have to contend with all the social media in order so that people do keep in contact with the fact that I continue to produce on YouTube, or like I'm starting to indeed do it.
Well, once we get to this conversation of social media, that brings up the fact that we do have, and through the Arts Council, a lot of our funding and a lot of our efforts go to very traditional organizations in town. Mm-hmm. Classic Sooner Theater, Firehouse, Cimarron Opera, Medieval Fair. Philharmonic is a newbie.
Right.
It's only like 3 years old. Uh-huh. Academia Philharmonica, Children's Art Network. Okay. Why are those so standard and acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it is because there are enough individuals who have been committed to be a volunteer for those organizations. Therefore, I volunteer and I get on a board of directors. All of a sudden, my responsibility is to raise money,
Mm-hmm.
to increase attendance at events. How are we going to do that? It's going to, at this point, up until just a few years ago, is traditional media, meaning through newspaper, television, radio, advertising.
And you have events, which you still do,
Right.
to raise funds and to, for the lack of a better terminology, hobnob. Or networking, as
Sure.
you will. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
The thing like Jazz in June, they're over 30 years now in existence. Their whole funding determines who they're going to have as performers.
Mm-hmm.
They always take a poll or survey of the people attending. Who would you like to hear? Well, a lot of the names they throw out there would be incredible to have in Norman, Oklahoma, but there's no way that they could be afforded.
Right.
So the cost factor becomes an issue. So we go back to the fact that in the community, an organization which finds the right base structure of volunteers is going to be the one that's going to be around. If someone, I know I've had this conversation with several artists, visual artists, who say that we don't do enough to promote visual arts. In actuality, if you take a look at the number of galleries that we have in Norman,
Mm-hmm.
in relationship to our population, we have a fair number. There is still a mentality, though, that of the people in Norman, they'll go to Santa Fe and buy a piece of art for many thousands of dollars from an artist who was from Norman, Oklahoma, and they could have bought the piece for a lot less here. But the fact that it's from Santa Fe increases its...
Rolling buzzards as...
Right.
Well,
The same thing happens in music. People from Norman will go to other cities, good example, Boston, to hear, because they have such a vibrant nightlife scene and live music. They will go there. They will to other cities, go to events, go to things, simply because it's not here in Norman. Meaning they're making it a travel experience.
Mm-hmm.
When if they would research what's going on, not only in Norman, but in the metropolitan area of Oklahoma City, they could hear much the same or even better.
I was hesitant to try to increase my profile around here, and then I was lucky to be bequeathed a new piece of musical equipment that I can use to do things that I couldn't possibly have done by myself before. Mm-hmm. And it's the kind of thing where now I take on the responsibility of trying to increase my profile and have more live events and do all the things that I had felt were somewhat pointless for myself here, only because I was discouraged by the fact that there was a proponent of a kind of musical image that was popular in the bars around here, a style that's called red dirt, which I don't have a whole lot in common with. I do, however, have some country-flavored songs, and I'm not any more unhappy with them than I am with any of the rest of my stuff. But I was just saying, that all of that is just to say that I now have, I feel like I've got a little bit more solid footing for what I'm doing there. But the only thing we can do is kind of refuse to die, because eventually that fact alone will be like, he's still doing that? And then they'll
Sort of get over their initial snobbery over local acts here not being as high quality. Now, the venues need some work, and that's a whole other issue, perhaps, again.
The venues really become an issue. I started on that a moment ago with the visual artists who don't feel like they have enough exposure at the galleries in the area. I'm very torn here, and if you're familiar with someone being left-brained and someone right-brained.
Mm-hmm.
Left-brained meaning organized, structured, and planned. Right-brained, the more creative and free-flowing. We find that a lot of times that the people who are extremely right-brained do not have a sense of what it takes from a business plan and a business point of view to make something happen. You and I've had this discussion.
I'm only vaguely getting a glimmer of it at this late age, but I'm willing to do certain things that I wasn't as keen to do before. I just don't think I should try to change the nature of what I do. I can just try to adjust to the fact that the venues that I'm going to be able to book easily at this point, people are not really paying close attention a lot of the time. They're just out and about of the evening. But I might be able to get total strangers in that way, and I like that very much. So anyway, I'm sorry, it was interrupted.
Well, I find it interesting that there are a good example here again, I believe in Norman, is we have a gallery called Gallery 123.
Yep, sure.
It's up above on the second floor in downtown Norman.
Near the record store. And,
yes, near the record, up
right.
above the record store, right. This is where people who are severely right-brained have also bonded with others and realized that we need a space to work in and a place to display our work.
Mm-hmm.
And they put together a business plan where these artists, as a collaborative effort, have studio space and gallery space. So instead of bemoaning the fact that there's not enough gallery space, these people became left-brained enough to say, let's create our own venue.
Mm-hmm.
I am such a big proponent of that because I believe that the people who do approach any of the arts, any of them,
yes,
more left-brain thinking,
mm-hmm.
without in any way compromising what you're doing on that right brain.
There are those who. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
In other
Go
words,
ahead. I was about to say something, but I'll wait.
okay, if I want to open a business and I go to the bank, they're not going to loan me any money unless I have a 1-year, 3-year, 5-year, and 10-year business plan.
Yes.
Okay, how is that any different than me as a performer, a vocal, instrumental, a visual artist, saying, okay, here's where I am now. Here's where I'm going to be a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And what will it take to get me from point 1 to point 5?
Uh-huh.
And I think many times somewhere in that process, the nature of artists says, the world owes me those steps 3, 4, and 5, instead of being willing to do what it takes to achieve them.
I am old enough now, and I have no children, that I'm happy to contend with a certain amount of this stuff. Plus, I have a little more legitimate confidence. It's not that kind of insecure, youthful arrogance. It's more like, no, I know I can do these things well, and I get a good response, X, Y, and Z on these occasions. I don't claim to have a clear picture entirely of who my, quote, target audience, unquote, is. But I strongly suspect that the original Red Dirt fans were really rather antipathetic towards anything like what I do. But then the people who have been on the very tail end, the young people who are aware of people who have been doing stuff in the last year or two, and it kind of just, they're just starting to go to bars and things, if they see me, they really don't have enough of a preconditioned notion of what they should be seeing out there. And they're not as hidebound culturally to believing that this is what makes us cool to listen to. All right? And so that somewhat converges with what you were talking about. But I was just going to say, we're almost at a half an hour, so I'd like to let you go pretty soon. But I just want to say thank you for talking with me, for one thing, because when I was a kid, we had some arts and music in school here in Norman, Oklahoma, but the attitude was so brutalized by gender role expectations, by a general anti-intellectual materialistic culture, a lot of religious fundamentalism, which was anti-culture.
But we also have to say,
all I'm saying is, in
that
7th grade, they were so fucking disrespectful to my art teacher, who I wasn't even that terribly fond of, because my mother's an artist, and I looked at her, and I thought, that's a real artist, and this woman teaching art was not quite to that. She didn't have that kind of charisma, but by God, she deserved respect, and she was encouraging of the people who were doing what they could, and there was all these boys who were just fucking horrible in there. I won't waste your time talking about that anymore, other than to say it makes me very wishing to be sympathetic to all of what you and people like you do in a town like Norman, to try to go in the other direction, no matter how hard it may be and how slow a process towards a more evolved thinking and a more artistically valid culture that we have.
We have to catch the moments. And when I say that, we have to look back. There were some teachers who may not even have been arts teachers who had an influence on you. who
I mean, I just feel so
were
bad for that
positive and
woman, you know?
supporting.
30 years later.
Right. But in every person's life comes moments when either a teacher, a friend, a mentor, a family member opens a window and you see something and hear something that you've not heard before. Unfortunately, those windows and doors are not opened enough.
Right.
So it's up to, since the schools are not doing that as well as they could, then it's up to the family. Unfortunately, a lot of the families don't even know that there's a window, much less how to open it.
They haven't been taught to value
They haven't
these
either.
things.
So a generation is built upon it.
Yeah.
So there are glimpses, and I think Norman, overall, Norman is pretty good.
Right.
In comparison to a lot of other places I've been and have seen. On any given night in Norman, there's something to go to.
Yes.
It might be a saxophone quartet, but you could go to it, like it or not, you could experience it.
Sure.
What we don't do is we don't allow ourselves the time, energy to make that effort.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Larry, because we'll perhaps one day in the future, if there's anything on your mind that you think is necessary to get out there to certain people that you might not have an opportunity to otherwise do that I might, please do holler at me and let me know. I sure do appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. Larry Walker, ladies and gentlemen, owner of Impression Salon and my father's employer, full disclosure. And you're listening to The Beau Show. We'll see you around.
Okay.